podcast on real relationships. My name is Sophia Giblin, and I am a relationship expert, international speaker, and best-selling author of the book Your Other Half. I decided to start this podcast because, in my opinion, relationships are currently not being portrayed as what they really are. Whether you're watching the news, TV, or on social media, the perception given to people is wrong. And my aim is to talk about what happens in the real world, talk about real stories, and listen to what real people think, do, or go through, as opposed to creating expectations of something that doesn't actually exist. I may not agree with everything that is said by my guests, but it is their chance to express their opinions and their stories. And here today we have Sophia Giblin, and we are going to talk about the relationship between parent and kids, basically. Hi, Sophia.
Hi, Sophie.
How are you?
Very well, thanks. How are you?
Good, thank you. So, for the benefit of everybody else, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a play therapist. So I help children explore and express difficult feelings using play and creativity rather than talking about them, because children don't always have the language to verbalize what it is that they're feeling or going through. So we use their natural language, which is play. And I'm the founder of Clear Sky Children's Charity, which provides play and creative arts therapies to children across the Thames Valley. And we also do lots of work with parents around the relationship with their children and how you can strengthen that relationship through play, because it is the foundation of mental health and where we start the building blocks of relationships for when we grow up, basically.
The first question, because I can, obviously I'm thinking it, so someone else is going to think it. So let's say there is a trauma in a child. How do they express it through play? Give us an example so that it's more concrete for people. Is it like the dolly gets beaten up? Is it an obvious thing, or is it sometimes really completely remote and you need to actually know what you're looking for?
It actually is quite obvious with children. So children's natural language is play. We learn to play before we speak. And you will see it with children where they play out scenarios from their lives. You'll see this outside of a therapy room. You see it in the playground or in the classroom. If you've ever watched that wonderful program, The Secret Life of 4-Year-Olds, where they film children in the playground, you'll see there was a really lovely scene with a little girl, and she's on the phone and she's going, "No, Richard, I don't love you anymore." And she's she's obviously playing out something that she's either seen at home
on TV or something.
On TV. Yeah. So we can't always know that it's necessarily a child's direct experience. But it might be something that they've absorbed somewhere else. And obviously children absorb information from loads of different places, films, TV, what they hear, what they see, and they will naturally bring that into their play. And the way that works in a therapeutic sense is that we give children a safe space to express themselves through play and through lots of different mediums, like, as you said, dolls, puppets, sand, music, art. And typically what you'll see is that if children have experienced something at home, like let's say domestic violence, you might often see children playing out conflict in a sand tray, let's say with 2 dolls. Or they'll do things like play out power imbalances with toys, where you might have one big scary puppet versus a very small little one. And you can start to see a little bit of conflict, what they might be trying to work out. But it's never our job to judge or analyze. Just as a therapist, you're trained to kind of pick up on those nuances of the play and try and see what the child might be processing.
It's interesting. I mean, as you're saying, I was just thinking, why did I used to play when I was little? And a lot of the time I was saving people. Which is actually quite interesting if you translate it to what I'm doing now. I know I'm not saving people, but metaphorically, you could argue that.
Yeah,
it's true. And I'm not even talking just of 3 years old. I think even at 8 or 10, in some of the role play type things. So it's quite interesting if you actually stop and think about it, about yourself.
Oh, absolutely, for sure. And it's interesting when you see it in the play as well, that typically children of different ages, where you might not expect them to play with certain things, will suddenly regress to a younger age. So you might have like an 11-year-old boy playing with baby dolls and feeding them, because maybe they have missed out on an experience of being nurtured. And so in the play where they are feeding a baby doll, they might be going back to revisit their own experience of being a baby and being fed. It's really fascinating. So yeah, your own types of play can give you clues to what it is that you might have needed, and also whether, as you said, like we're still playing them out as adults.
And what got you into that?
So my story is one of trauma, I suppose. I had a very normal upbringing with one of 4 children. I'm the eldest. I have had a mum and a dad together. But when I was 15, my mum got sick with cancer when I was doing my GCSE exams, and she passed away very quickly within just 3 months of being diagnosed. When I was actually in my maths GCSE exam at the time. I remember being called out to go and be with her when she passed away. And what happened was that we were left with our dad, who was not the main carer. You know, my mum was a stay-at-home mum, and you know, I kind of felt like I didn't really know my dad all that well, so we had to build a new relationship with him as the sole carer. And but also because I'm the eldest and a girl, I was put very quickly into the mum role. So I would do things like, I had to go to cookery classes to learn how to cook for the family, and would do the washing and caring for my younger siblings. But what happened was that because that happened for me, I wasn't really given any space to grieve the loss of my mum, and my mental health took a real turn, and I really started struggling badly with anxiety and with depression for a number of years. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s, and I was very lost, to be honest. I didn't know where I was going, what I was doing, that I came across play therapy. My cousin was training as a play therapist, and she said to me that play therapy is about helping children express themselves through play. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is the thing that could have really helped me and my younger siblings at the time when we needed it the most. We weren't allowed the space to grieve. And for all of us, that meant that we dealt with things in different ways. But for me, especially, I internalized everything. I shoved all the feelings down. I didn't want to talk about it. And what was interesting as well is that at the time I was given counselling, and I'd sort of do counselling in air quotes, because I think the lady that I saw was probably not a qualified counsellor. She probably was a volunteer at the hospice. And she used to ask me lots of difficult questions, like how I was feeling and what was it like without my mum, and stuff I really didn't want to talk about because it was too painful. But also, even at 15, I didn't have the words to articulate how difficult it felt. So when I found out that there was another way to express feelings without talking, I thought this is really something special. And I went on to set up a charity to deliver that work, and then train as a therapist myself.
Fair enough. And you know, I'm just thinking outside the box a bit here, but I think, you know, even if you took it in a work environment, if you had some sort of like away days for teams where you got them to play, you probably would find out a lot about people and where they could improve and stuff.
Oh, absolutely. There's a really lovely quote that's, you find out more about a person in an hour of play than in a lifetime of conversation, because you connect on a different level. We're so used to putting words around everything and talking things through. It's very cognitive. When you're in play, you're more in a flow state, in a state of being. So yeah, play is beneficial for everybody, and we all play at any age.
So how would you say, you know, and why is the relationship with a parent or between parents and children so crucial?
Well, this is where we are developing our sense of safety in the world. We come into the world as helpless babies. We can't do anything for ourselves. The only mechanism that we have to get our needs met is to cry. And that mechanism of crying is a signal to our parents that they need to provide us with food, comfort, a cuddle, being changed, whatever it is. And so the parent or caregiver has to tune into the child's needs. Now, what can happen is that this relationship can get disrupted very early on, and children then learn different ways of getting their needs met. They either upregulate their feelings, which might be crying louder or making their behavior more visible. as they get older. So what might be known as more attention-seeking behaviour. I don't really like that word. I think it's very labelly. I would call it attachment-seeking behaviour. So they can upregulate their behaviour, and then they learn that they get their needs met. They get attention from their parents when they are louder, or they can downregulate their feelings and learn that when they're quiet and good, that's when they can be in proximity with their parent. And then what happens is they start to numb or dissociate from their feelings. And so what happens in these very early years is that we build a blueprint for how we get our needs met in relationships for our whole lives. So the relationship that we have with our parents is very often a strong predictor for the types of relationships that we will have as adults, romantic relationships, because we'll seek out the same sort of pattern. And that's how it gets transmitted down generations.
And how would you say, because sometimes relationships change. So for instance, you might have a good relationship as a child, and then as you get older, it disintegrates. So it surely still defines us in some way. So does that mean that we then forget that first pattern and become stuck in the second? Or how does that work, do you think?
Well, that pattern is dynamic and ever changing. And as children, we base our behaviour on the way that adult caregivers respond to us. So if the adult caregiver behaviour changes, then we will automatically change our behaviour to get our needs met. Yeah. And obviously, if there are things like trauma in the family, or loss, violence, anything like that, it can disrupt the relationships. So it's important that those relationships are strong and solid to start with, ideally, because it builds this really strong foundation then for life, for good mental health. And children that have what's called secure attachment with parents or caregivers are shown to have the best outcomes across the lifespan, economically, socially, psychologically. So really, if we can nurture those relationships early on, then we have better chances in later life.
And I think that's quite, interesting as well, is that, even in what I'd class as a good family, where you have a good relationship with your parents and stuff, most people actually carry some form of trauma that stems from childhood, whether it's, from being picked on at school by other people, or whatever it is, random events that actually to the outside world looks like nothing, because some of us are more sensitive than others to certain situations than others. And actually, is there a way to be 100% a good parent without putting anything onto your child?
Yeah, so the research says that as a parent, you just need to be good enough. So that doesn't mean being perfect 100% of the time. In fact, the research shows that parents who are too perfect can actually make their children anxious.
Worse, yeah, because then it's not realistic, so to speak.
Yeah, and it can be almost slightly overbearing in children. It invokes some fears and anxiety. So being good enough just means being warm, consistent and predictable at less than 50% of the time. That is being good enough. And I think there's a lot of guilt placed on parents. Am I doing a good job? Am I messing my child up? And the reality is that we just parent in the way that we were parented. It's an automatic
completely the other way.
Yeah, or that's it, right? So, or we swing so far the other way then that we provide a completely different experience for the children. But the idea is that what you can do is just interrupt the pattern in a healthy way through education, so that you become more aware of your triggers, your anxiety and your responses to your children. And the good news is that children often need less from us. They need us to be present with them. They don't necessarily need us to do anything. So everything that I kind of recommend with parents around relationship building is about just getting on the floor and playing with your child. You don't need to do anything special, just spend time.
Yeah, and I think that it's social media a lot of the time as well, isn't it? Because people unconsciously compare themselves all the time, and that's when they start thinking, am I doing a good job? Am I not? This person's doing it that way. I had a conversation with someone the other day, interestingly enough, and we're talking like grown-up kids. One's doing an apprenticeship and the other one is now working, is 22, still both working at home. And she only charges them £25 a week rent or something. And then she was talking to a work colleague who's got a 16-year-old, but to make sure that he doesn't get into trouble too much, he works 4 days a week. So he's at school 3 days a week, works 4 days a week, gets, I don't know, £100 a month because of his age or whatever, and she takes £20 a week for rent. She does this, he's got to buy his work shoes and all the rest of it. And the other person was like, oh my God, am I being too lax with my children, or is she being too harsh? And it really triggered a lot of questioning inside about what she should do.
Yeah, and I think the reality is that there's not necessarily like a should.
An answer.
Yeah, there's not an answer. It is about what you feel is right, and for your child as well. And for some children, I had someone recently say, you know, I very much encourage my children to be as independent as possible, so they're making their own lunches by the age of 9 or something like that. For some parents that would be fine, for others that feels uncomfortable. But the reality is that children will be independent when they have a solid foundation.
Yeah.
Without the solid foundation, it actually will be a false independence. It will be a like, I have to do this for myself because nobody else is going to do it for me, and I can't express my needs, so I have to shove them down and suppress them. Whereas children who feel safe in the world, that have that early relationship, will actually tend to be more resilient and more able to go out there and explore and feel comfortable to make mistakes, because they know that they can come back into the warmth of the relationship and be soothed by that, and then they can go out again and make more mistakes. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes, but because that's how we learn. But I think for some, there's a lot of anxiety around that, and when parents have anxiety, it can rub off on the children as well. So yeah, there's not a right or a wrong way. I think we just all need to take a bit of pressure off ourselves to be perfect. It's what feels best for you and your family.
And I think it's the same as everything else, isn't it? We all have different opinions on various subjects. So it's going to be the same in the upbringing of kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is you can spot a dysfunction with people who say, well, I was hit as a child and it never did me any harm. But and that happens quite a lot. You hear that a lot. And I always sort of think, well, that's a little bit of a red flag for me, because it's almost like as adults, we forget the pain of what it was actually like to be a child, to be frightened and to be scared. And that's how that type of parenting passes down generations as well. It becomes part of our blueprint. So we have to interrupt it somewhere if we want things to be different for our own children.
So what would you recommend parents do then?
So it's a lot of it is about educating yourself about finding new ways to relate to your children. But for me, it all comes down to the relationship. If you can work on the relationship with your children consciously, in the same way that we work on relationships with our partners or with our friends, if we invest time in the relationship with our children, we can get to know them as individuals. What can happen is that sometimes children are seen as an extension of the parent, and therefore not their own person in their own right. But they are. As soon as they're born, they are. Before they're born, they are a little individual person with a personality, wants, needs, desires, wishes of their own. And so what I recommend is that you spend about 30 minutes a week just playing with your children one-on-one, with no distractions, no screens. Take the doorbell off, hang the phone up, and just get out some traditional toys, things that your child likes to play with. It might be Lego, or they might like playing with dolls or Play-Doh, whatever it is. Just give them an opportunity for you to play. And through the play, it creates this lovely relationship where the child feels safe, and they will start talking to you as well.
I think it's the same as, for instance, if someone comes to you and starts a Spanish Inquisition. So, what did you do yesterday? Who were you with? Where did you went? Did you go even? You're not gonna, you don't want to volunteer the information. You feel under attack. Where if you're talking about, oh, yesterday I went to such a place and it was really nice. Have you ever been there? The other person is automatically going to start opening up. And as you say, it's the same with a play, because it creates situations, it creates a different experience, doesn't it? So you can then relate back to that too.
Yeah, and it's more relaxed. It's much more gentle and less threatening. lots of parents will say that when they pick up their kids from school, they'll say, "How was your day at school?" And the kids will go, "I don't know, I can't remember." They don't want to answer the question because it's too direct, and children are often scared of getting it wrong. They will often base what they say on what they think adults want to hear, so it's not even a genuine response. If you come home from school and you just spend 30 minutes playing together, the child will often volunteer that information without you even having to ask, because they feel safe and connected. Yeah, so that's
what
the
about
idea.
if they get older then? How, as I was saying, because sometimes things go wrong when they become a teenager, for instance. So how do you keep that going? Because obviously you're not going to throw the Legos on the floor when they're 15.
Well, you say that. Some 15-year-olds still really love playing with Lego. I love playing with Lego. It's just an evolution of play. So I think when we think of the word play, we think of young children. But the reality is that we all play, even as adults. And play is just activities that we engage in for no set purpose, just because we enjoy them. So as your children get older and become teenagers, they might be more drawn to screens. So we're going to have to find ways to bring them back into like a 3D experience with us, something that you can do together that doesn't involve screens or them living in a virtual world. And that could be anything. It could be building something. It could be baking. It might even be, our 30-minute playtime. It could be board games, or our 30-minute playtimes are now a coffee. We go out for a hot chocolate together, and that's our special thing we do once a week. So you just adapt it and ask the child as well, what is it that you want to do? And often they say, I don't know. And so we have to try as parents. We just have to give it a go and see what they like. But showing them that we care enough to make an effort increases the strength of that relationship as well.
And I think it is, as you say, about that reassurance. For instance, I did a video not so long ago about arguing and whether arguments are healthy or not. And for some people, being in a relationship where there's arguments all the time, they find it unsettling, they're not reassured, they feel like, they're always on edge. But for other people, it's just part of life. That's how they thrive. And I think it's finding what comfort is to you, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is about communication style. So what's normal in a family won't necessarily be normal and acceptable outside socially. And also it's like, is that what we want? Is that how we want to be talking to each other? But within a family, it's very difficult to pick up on those things, because people will trigger you. So children will trigger parents, parents will trigger children. It's just the way that it is. But as the adults, we kind of have to take responsibility for that, because it's not our children's job to be more emotionally intelligent than we are. We have to work on ourselves. We have to be honest with ourselves as well. And I always recommend that people go and have therapy to understand their own experience of being parented, so that we can do it differently if we need to. And I'm not saying that every parent needs to do it differently. It's just that the more conscious we are, the better chances we're giving our children of having happy, healthy lives moving forward.
Yeah, and I think sometimes as well, if, for instance, a mother shouts at a child, is this really going to achieve anything? Even if they're very naughty, there's surely other ways of making them understand the behaviour is not what's expected of them, so to speak. In the same way that if you are having an argument with someone and someone tells you to calm down, is very unrealistic to expect the other person to calm down. It won't happen. If anything, is going to add oil to the fire, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes we can't help being triggered in that way, and sometimes we do just snap, and everyone does it. We're all human.
You've got your moods, you've got whatever's happened to you, if you haven't slept enough, if you're hungry, all this sort of stuff.
Exactly. And so we have to forgive ourselves for that, but we have to also make conscious choices to try and do it differently next time. But what happens when the relationship is there and very strong is that children's behavior gets better, their communication gets better, they're more cooperative, they're more helpful, they're better listeners. And so what often happens is that when the relationship maybe is wobbly, that's when arguments happen. That's when it is easy to snap and shout at your children, and then it kind of puts more of a distance between the relationship. It's the same thing as in a romantic relationship. If you're not communicating, you're not spending time together, it will ultimately break down in some way, and that's not what we want. We want to work on it. make
And
it
do
really
you
strong.
think that if you look at, like, I don't know, 50, 100 years ago, obviously things were very different. But do you think that today's society has brought on some of the problems that come with it, sort of thing?
Yeah, what kind of problems do you mean?
Well, for instance, when I went to school, which is a good 20 or 30 years ago, give or take, I don't recall anybody of the age of 10 self-harming, for instance. I
Okay.
don't recall people, again, of that sort of age saying, I'm depressed, I have mental health issues.
Mm.
Where now it's something that actually is when you don't people say it, that you kind of question it, if you know what I mean, because it's become common.
Yeah, and I think, well, I wonder if it's also because we're just talking about it more, we're more aware. So when I was at school and I was really struggling after my mum died, no one, like, people just didn't talk about it. So I would go into classes and the teachers would know that my mum had just died. They wouldn't say anything because I think they felt awkward. And I think it's amazing that now we can have open and honest discussions and conversations about it. But I do also think that on the flip side, there's a little bit of like a labeling that might be going on, and the concern that I would
Which
have.
is not helpful, really.
Yeah, I mean, it can be helpful at times if you need, let's say, medication or something like that, or you really need help, then that could be helpful. But this notion that there's something wrong with you is something that really stuck with me after I lost my mum. I went to the doctors. I remember they gave me antidepressants at 16. I was on my own as well. Like, I didn't have a parent with me or anything. And the reality was that I was just grieving. I wasn't depressed. I was grieving, and that is a natural process. And I will always be grieving, probably, but just at different varying levels. So it's when we kind of label ourselves as I have anxiety, that in itself can become a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, sometimes I experience anxiety. That's more of a part of me that I can integrate and work with, rather than it being black and white. It's not black and white. Nothing in life is black and white. There's lots of shades of grey, and it's how we can integrate our experiences.
But I think, I recall as a child when I was 8, a close friend of mine, actually similar story to what happened to you with his mum. She was actually also a doctor, so she knew something was wrong. They went for the test, and she, for some reason, saw the X-ray and knew it was everywhere. And it was, I think, I don't remember the timings, I was too young, but within a couple of months she was gone. And obviously at school, we had been briefed by the teachers. I recall that the day that she died, he was actually at my house, and then his auntie came to pick him up to take him wherever it was. But it was difficult to talk about it because they told us that his mum had died, but it didn't say, they said be nice to him, but what does be nice to him mean? Do you ask questions? Do you not? What if he wants to cry? It was also a very private 8-year-old. It was a boy. So also, you don't want a boy to cry or whatever, especially back in the day. So I don't know. I think back on my own behaviour. What did I do or not do? Or, as also an 8-year-old, it's difficult to know.
It's so hard, isn't it? And it brings up all sorts of stuff for us as well. And then we feel awkward and make us feel upset. And it can be hard to just bear someone else's difficult feelings without trying to rescue them, without trying to make it better, offer them solutions. And unfortunately, when we do these things, we do them from the most well-intentioned place.
Positive intention.
Yeah, but it can make the other person feel alienated, not understood. And so I think it is good. What is good about the conversation that we're having at the moment around mental health is that the best thing that we can do is just listen, is just be present, give people our time, not try and fix it. Just listen and really hear them and reflect things back, like, that sounds really hard. Sometimes I think people are scared to say that, to acknowledge that it's hard, because I don't know, that it might reinforce somebody's bad feelings and make them feel worse. But actually, in reality, that doesn't happen. It makes people feel understood. And when people feel understood, they can start to move through it. When they don't feel understood, that's when they can start to suppress those feelings and keep them inside. And that leads to poor mental health.
And I think that the problem, everything goes back down to acceptance, really. It's accepting there's an issue, not just within ourselves, but if we are with somebody who has got the issue, as you say, we want to fix it. We want to make them feel better. Well, if we just accepted there is an issue and it's going to take a bit of time and we're going to be a bit low and then we'll be all right. But acceptance is key in so many ways and so many different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And just giving people time and letting them know that you're there for them. Just to listen. That's all you need to do.
So sometimes kids do recognise that they're struggling. I'm not talking a 3-year-old here, although they might, but I'm talking slightly older. What can be done? Because sometimes I suppose they probably give us clues that there's an issue maybe in the family or whatever. But at the same time, they could also be playing us to try to be, do you know what I mean? You've got to be careful and literally take it with a pinch of salt. So how do you assess a situation in that way? And I'm not meaning you in your work environment. I mean like a friend's child, so to speak.
So I always think with that type of behaviour, if a child is recognising that they are struggling with something, it's a genuine ask for help, which I would suggest that any ask for help is a genuine ask for help, is to support them through listening, through relationship building, and also through therapy, or they might need to go to their GP as well, just to make sure that they're okay. But if you get sometimes you get children who will overly talk about their issues all the time. And what's happened here is that they've learned that when they talk about their issues, they get attention. And that's okay. What they're seeking is connection. And so what you can do with those children, the best thing you can do is spend consistent, dedicated time with them playing or doing something that they enjoy. As soon as you put a framework around time together and you say, we've got half an hour every Tuesday at 4:30. This is our time. No one else is coming into it. It's not getting disrupted. This is important to me. Then those behaviors stop, because children know they can have your attention for a whole dedicated amount of time. And then all the sort of attention seeking or attachment seeking behaviors quiet down, because they know they're getting what they need. Because you promised it and you're following through on it as well. That's important. We have to be consistent for children.
Well, Sophia, even, thank you so much. We're getting towards the end of our time, but the one thing I wanted to ask you, what is the one thing you want people to take away from this?
The one thing that I want you to take away is that it is all about relationships. Everything about mental health and well-being is about how we can relate to other people in this world, how we can connect. And the best place that we can start that process is as early on as possible. But also that if you're listening to this and you're worried that maybe the relationship isn't the best with your child, the good news is that it is dynamic and ever changing, and there's never a better time than the present to start putting positive things in place. So I just encourage you to spend time, make time for your children and for yourself too. You'll get a lot out of it.
Thank you. Very wise words. So yeah, thanks again for your time today. And for everybody else, then if you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, but more importantly, come back for the next episode. Thank you.